Hello hockey fans, and welcome back to another video. Some of you might remember that just before the beginning of the new year, I made a couple of videos on the best goaltenders and the best forwards of the 2010s, highlighting those players that had scored the most points or produced the best records between the beginning of the 10-11 NHL season all the way until the conclusion of the year 2019. You might also remember that I never actually got round to looking at the best D-men. So in order to finally complete this trilogy of videos and give the Blue Liners some well-deserved attention, I have enlisted the help of fellow hockey YouTuber OhNyquist to give me a hand. If you don't know his channel, it's kinda like mine, but much better, so make sure you go and check him out after you've watched this video. But without further ado, allow us to take you through the 10 best NHL defensemen of the last decade. Before we begin, let me just clarify that this list and its rankings are based purely on the number of total points each player has scored over the last decade. That's it. I haven't taken into account their team's overall success or any advanced analytics, and I haven't ranked them using my own personal bias either. It's purely based on the overall point totals. Now that's out of the way, let's get on with the list, shall we? Take it away, Nyquist.
Starting off the list, at the number 10 spot, we have Ryan Suter, current defenseman for the Minnesota Wild. Now, Ryan Suter began the decade with the Nashville Predators, the team that he spent the first 7 seasons of his NHL career with, before signing that massive contract with the Minnesota Wild in the summer of 2012, along with Zach Parise. Ryan Suter has definitely been one of the top defenders and most consistent in the entire NHL over the past 10 years, putting up a total of 414 points in 727 games over the decade. And even though Ryan Suter is now 35 years old, and he's definitely not talked about as much now as he was when he first signed with the Minnesota Wild, he still puts up some really good numbers, and this year was no different. He had 48 points in 69 games, which actually put him second on the team, only behind Kevin Fiala. Ryan Suter has had an amazing career and is obviously still going strong, such a massive part of that Minnesota Wild team, and a big reason why they were able to stay in the playoff hunt throughout the majority of the season.
At number 9, we have PK Subin. It may not seem like it nowadays, but PK Subin was one of the best defensemen in the league for much of the past decade. A second-round pick by the Montreal Canadiens back in 2007, Subin would take a few years of seasoning in the juniors and the AHL before breaking into the league full-time at the beginning of the 10-11 NHL season. Since then, the Canadian defenseman has predominantly split his time between the Canadiens and the Nashville Predators, with him really flexing his point-scoring muscles between the 13-14 and 17-18 seasons, scoring 51 points or more in 4 of the 5 seasons during that span, en route to finishing the decade with 101 goals and 414 points in 682 NHL games. Not only that, but Subin has been named a 3-time All-Star and has received the James Norris Memorial Trophy for Defenseman of the Year in 2013, thanks to his 11-goal, 38-point campaign during the lockout-shortened 12-13 season. Sure, his recent 18-point -21 season with the New Jersey Devils isn't exactly ideal, but the 30-year-old has already shown that he is capable of playing like one of the league's top blue liners. He just needs to find a way to get back to his production of years past. Perhaps focusing more on his game and less on his social media presence might help, but that's just me.
Moving on now to the number 8 spot, we have Dustin Byfuglien of the, well, no one. He is a free agent right now because the news recently came out that him and the Winnipeg Jets have finally reached an agreement on the termination of his contract, which is pretty crazy. He left a lot of money on the table, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here on out with Byfuglien. And if he does decide to call it a career, he definitely had a pretty impressive one, and over the past decade was one of the better defenders in the entire National Hockey League. 122 goals, 416 total points in just 609 games over the past 10 years between the Thrashers and the Jets. And when it comes to Big Buff, it's obviously not just about the offensive numbers. When he's healthy and when he's playing, he's going to log a lot of minutes. He's a hard-hitting guy, definitely someone that you'd love to have on your team, but hate to play against. And if he does decide to continue his playing career, it's going to be super interesting to see where he ends up playing next season.
At number 7, we have Alex Pietrangelo. Though he only entered the top defenseman conversation in the latter half of the 2010s, Alex Pietrangelo has been producing points all decade long. The 4th overall pick by the St. Louis Blues in 2008, Pietrangelo also joined the league full-time during the 10-11 NHL season, and has since spent his entire career with the Blues. The current captain of the franchise has scored 41 points or more in 7 of his last 9 seasons, en route to finishing the decade with 102 goals and 426 points in 712 games. The Canadian defenseman has also been named a 2-time All-Star and a 2019 Stanley Cup champion, becoming the first Blues player in franchise history to get his hands on the cup last season. With 52 points in 70 games at the pause of the 1920 season, Pietrangelo is having one of the most productive years of his entire NHL career, and is showing very little signs of slowing down as he enters his 30s. With his contract set to expire soon, there's been all sorts of rumours as to whether Pietrangelo will be changing teams in the near future, but I think this D-man likes singing the Blues a little too much to give it up now.
Next up at the number 6 spot, we have Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it's kind of impressive that he's this high on the list because he didn't really blossom into a superstar caliber defenseman until the 2013-14 season. That really puts it into perspective how good Victor Hedman is, and he's still only 29 years old and arguably the best defender currently in the National Hockey League. Hedman has put up 435 points in 658 games over the past decade, won the Norris Trophy for League's best defenseman in 2017-2018. Hedman also put up 55 points in 65 games this season before everything got put on hold. He's an amazing defender, not just offensively, but in his own end. He's going to play a lot of minutes. He's going to play against the other team's top line. Victor Hedman definitely turned out to be everything that he was expected to be when the Lightning drafted him 2nd overall back in the 2009 draft.
Halfway through this list now with number 5, Kris Letang. Despite dealing with his fair share of injuries over the last decade, and having played a full 82-game season just once in his entire career, Kris Letang has been one of the most productive blue liners in the entire league when he's been out on the ice. A 3rd-round pick by the Pittsburgh Penguins back in 2005, Letang made the Penguins roster for his first full NHL season in 08-09. Where he would then post a couple of 20 to 30 point seasons as he found his game in the bigs. This decade though, the Canadian defenseman has really turned up the heat, scoring 50 points or more in 5 of his last 9 seasons, en route to scoring 101 goals and 440 points in just 561 games during the 2010s. Letang's impressive production has also earned him plenty of trophies and individual accolades too, as he has been named an NHL All-Star 6 times this decade and has won 3 Stanley Cup championships during his time with the Penguins. With 15 goals and 44 points in 61 games this season, the 32-year-old is showing that he can be just as, if not more productive, than some of his younger contemporaries on this list. Hopefully he can stay a little healthier and play a full 82-game season again as he inches closer to his twilight years. It's certainly not going to get any easier for him, is it?
At the number 4 spot, we have defenseman John Carlson for the Washington Capitals, and ever since becoming a full-time NHLer for the Capitals in the 10-11 season, he has always been a really good offensive defenseman, but the numbers that he has put up over the past couple of seasons have been pretty absurd. 447 points for John Carlson in 707 games in the decade, and 213 of those points have came over the past 3 seasons, highlighted by him putting up 75 points this year in just 69 games. It's been a while since we've seen a defenseman in the National Hockey League put up those kind of offensive numbers. There definitely isn't a guy in the National Hockey League that I'd rather have a quarterback in my power play than John Carlson. He is lethal. He is a big reason why the Washington Capitals had such a good year. And even though John Carlson has yet to win a Norris Trophy for League's best defenseman, that could definitely all change when the awards are given out for the 2019-20 season.
Penultimately from me at number 3, we have Keith Yandell. Arguably the most unexpected name to be on this list, Keith Yandell has gone about his business well under the radar for quite some time, and in doing so, has added his name amongst the league's best defensemen over the last decade. A 4th round pick by the Phoenix Coyotes during the 2005 draft, Yandell cracked the Coyotes roster full-time for the 08-09 season, and began to cement himself as one of the best players in Coyotes franchise history. During the 2010s though, the American defenseman would split his time between the Coyotes, the New York Rangers, and the Florida Panthers, where he would score at least 41 points in every season, except the 12-13 lockout-shortened year, as well as 52 points or more in 5 of his last 9 seasons, en route to scoring 77 goals and 473 points in 745 games. The 3-time All-Star is also the NHL's Iron Man, having played in 921 consecutive NHL games, dating between the 26th of March 2009 all the way to the pause of the 1920 season, the longest streak ever by an NHL defenseman, as well as sitting second all-time only behind Doug Jarvis. With 5 goals and 45 points in 69 games this season, the 33-year-old is continuing to showcase himself as one of the top-producing blue liners in the league, reinforcing that he has no plans to slow down anytime soon. Now, if only he could help the Panthers become a legitimate playoff contender. We've been expecting it for a while now, Florida, come on.
Moving along now, at the number 2 spot, we have defenseman for the San Jose Sharks, Brent Burns. And say what you want about Brent Burns, you can't deny how good this guy has been over the past 10 years in the National Hockey League. He does have his critiques, and rightfully so, because he isn't amazing in his own end, but he easily makes up for that for the boost that he gives you offensively. And I know it wasn't an amazing year for Brent Burns, and it wasn't really a good year for the Sharks in general, but he was still able to put up 45 points in 70 games at the age of 35 years old. A total of 538 points in 711 games over the past 10 years, a Norris Trophy in the 2016-17 season when he had 76 points for the Sharks in 82 games, easily one of the league's best defensemen of the past decade.
And finally, at number 1, the best defenseman in the NHL over the last decade, Erik Karlsson. The only player on this list to have won the Norris Trophy more than once during the 2010s, Erik Karlsson shall go down in history as not just the best blue liner of the last decade, but one of the best of his generation. The 15th overall pick by the Ottawa Senators in the 2008 draft, Carlson joined the Senators roster full-time during the 09-10 season, after beginning the year with a brief stint in the AHL. Once he was in the league full-time though, the Swedish defenseman would hit the ground running. Over the last decade, Carlson has split his time between the Senators and the San Jose Sharks, where he has scored 60 points or more in 6 of his last 9 seasons, and even scored 70 points or more in 4 of those seasons, en route to recording 128 goals and 565 points in 660 games. The 6-time All-Star is also the only player that I'm discussing on this list to go a point per game over an entire 82-game season, thanks to his 16-goal, 82-point year in 15-16. Though he hasn't been the same dominant player since undergoing foot surgery in 2017, considering the 29-year-old has been able to muster up 85 points in 109 games for the Sharks, it just goes to show you how high the expectations have been for him these last few years. Right now, Carlson is being just as productive as the other top players at his position, but his play over the last few years has been considered disappointing or simply not good enough because he isn't putting up the same monster numbers that he was earlier in the decade. Recently being paid a large chunk of change certainly doesn't help his case, but the guy is still almost a point per game as a defenseman. There aren't many of them around, you know. Hopefully Carlson finds a way to get healthy again and back to his play of seasons past, because when he was on his game, he sure was a treat to watch. And that was a look at the 10 best NHL defensemen of the last decade. A big thank you once again to OhNyquist for joining me for this video. It really did help me out a lot. Make sure you go and check out his channel. The link will be in the description. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. A big thank you to Antti Hannanen, Chris Gadsby, Connor B, Paul Mallia, Jordan Whitehead, and Martin Tolness, as well as a huge thank you to Max Artis for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.